meeting to order. First item on the agenda is the adoption of the agenda. I will entertain a motion to adopt the agenda as presented.
I'll second the motion.
I'll move that we adopt the agenda.
Sorry,
Yeah.
okay. I move to, sorry.
Okay, no errors or omissions, anything added from administration? No? Okay. So I'll call the question. All those in favor of adopting the agenda as presented?
Aye.
Any opposed? Carried. All right, on to item 3.1, which is the motion to approve the March 23rd, 2021 meeting minutes. If everyone's had a chance to review them, I would entertain a motion to move or second.
Also move.
Councillor Bashara, is there a second to that motion?
A second.
Councillor Radisky, if there is no opposition, I will call it carried. 3.2, motion to approve April 13th, 2021. If there is somebody that is willing to move the minutes of the April 13th, 2021 minutes.
Also move.
Councillor Vetri, is there a seconder to that motion?
I'll second that.
Councillor Hughes. If there is no opposition to calling it carried, I will do so now. Item 3.3, motion to approve the April 14th, 2021 minutes.
I'll move to approve as presented.
Councillor is there a second?
I'll second.
Councillor Bashara. If there's no opposition, I will call that carried for the motion to approve the minutes. Now, 3.4, is there any business arising from the minutes of our previous three meetings?
2.4.
Is that
2.4?
2.4?
2.4 business arising from that, it's not 3.4.
It's 3.4.
I've got it 3.42.
It just sounded like you said 3.
Oh, it is 3. I don't know if you have the same agenda.
Delegation of public hearings is 3.
Might be in the wrong one.
Yeah, I got it. 2.4 on mine.
Okay.
Yeah, 3, 4 on mine.
3, 4 on mine.
Yeah.
Yeah, but 3, 4.
Because 2 is adoption of the agenda. Anyway.
We're gonna get a change.
I don't know.
There was a small agenda error, but it's all clear.
Okay.
You guys should all be on
Okay,
the
just want to
same
make sure we're all have the same agenda in front of us.
Just refresh.
Okay. Refresh.
Okay.
Small agenda error.
I've refreshed.
So if there's no business arising from the minutes, I will move on to correspondence. So correspondence to receive, item 5.1, Northern Animal Rescue, some stats there involving the animal rescue or animal control services in our community. I'm not sure if there was any discussion that anybody would like to have around that.
This report is sort of captures what happens in the whole region. Our contract is with NAR to provide service to the town specific. And I like the numbers to be, the information to be more on how many, how many animals were taken, cats, dogs, whatever. How many were licensed, how many were not, those kinds of things. Challenges they encountered doing their business with the community. Not a regional adoption, like basically these are rescues that are going somewhere, and it's not really, it doesn't give me the information to.
Councillor Bashar?
I would like to make a suggestion to request administration place this on the next committee of the whole agenda in regards to animal control within the town of Larange, because that does bring up a good point about the statistics we receive and the actions of Northern Animal Rescue and how they do their business. And I believe that we should have a conversation, a dedicated conversation to what we expect from service levels and be able to direct administration in the implementation of our contract to better it, to clarify, to get what we need out of it, if council agrees with that.
I would like to see that.
Any opposition? Is that doable for a delegation? Awesome. If there's nothing else from that, I will entertain a motion to receive and file the correspondence.
I move to receive and file the correspondence.
Is there a seconder to that motion?
I'll second.
Councillor Vetri. If there's no opposition, I will call it carried. Moving on to the committee reports. Now, just administratively, are we allowed to just go through them all individually and make one motion to accept committee reports?
Yes.
Okay. So with that, if somebody was willing to comment on the Lackawanna Regional Waste Management Corporation minutes, if there's any highlights from that you'd like to highlight.
Councillor Hardis, you put in a pretty good report, so I'll let him speak to it.
We're having a meeting on the 29th to basically discuss issues around rates that are going to be charged. But first of all, it looks like the opening date is going to be pushed back to originally we were targeting for June 1st. Now we're looking at July 1st is more likely to be the startup date, and that has to do with a little bit of delays in the obtaining the license from the province to operate as a landfill. So, but in the meantime, we've got a fair bit of work to do in terms of trying to come up with rates that we're going to charge and work on those kind of details. There's also some, in the meantime, there are some deficiencies that still have to be cleaned up. There's some gravel that's got to be put on the road in a couple spots just to make sure it's going to meet the traffic needs. So that's kind of where we're at.
Cool. One question I did have in regards to the waste management, is there, or has there been any discussion on bringing out like the cardboard bins back into the service for like people that want to drop off cardboard on the weekends? Or maybe just, again, a difference in the business hours to be able to accommodate some people on the weekends?
If you don't mind, Councillor Hardis, I'll speak to that.
Well,
Because I've had a conversation with the manager, because I did have, it's actually tucked in the report that I gave with, that's titled Policing and Justice Administration Committee. It's on the bottom of that one, but just as an addition to that, I did have a conversation on the side with the manager asking about that, and it was relating to some community feedback that I was receiving about the recycling facility access, and asked some questions. The response I got was due to the risk of aerosolized hazards in processing. Unmonitored bins will not be used until staff can be protected through full vaccination. Now, vaccinations are moving along well. It's you know, most of the north is waiting for second shots. So when that happens, I was assured that for sure the bins will be at least put out on the weekends. So it's coming. It's just about mitigating risk for staff. That said, that's an item which I will be bringing up at the board level when we get there. Right now, just as an aside, tomorrow is a bylaw revision meeting, and then the day after is the board meeting. So there's some process going on with all of that. It's a little bit slow in coming because a lot of people are quite busy with getting the landfill sorted out.
Absolutely.
I think we're going to ensure that we resolve that issue before the new landfill opens, because if everything can be put in there according to weight, cardboard doesn't weigh much, going to take, you know, and we brought that up, is like, you know, the more cardboard gets in the landfill, the shorter the lifespan of that landfill is going to be. So we want to have that directed to the recycle places, and so right now they're having some issues with some of the businesses. Containers are being mixed with garbage, and so they're going to have to, you know, communicate that with those businesses to ensure that they're going to be prepared to, when the new landfill opens, that all those issues are solved, and then those will be going directly to the recycle building as opposed to ending up at the landfill. So we got some work to do, but we haven't, you know, it's been on the forefront.
Absolutely. Councillor Vetri?
So I'm trying to, so there's concern that people are going to get COVID through aerosol cans that are being put in the...
Just aerosol, if the bins are unmonitored, they may have waste mixed in with the recyclable materials. Therefore, unmonitored bins, because right now the recycling center is open Monday to Friday, something till 4, I can't remember exactly what the hours are. So you can go and drop off your cardboard during those hours except for lunch, which is not convenient for a lot of people, and they understand that. When it comes to the hours, I think that does have to be a conversation at the board level when it comes to operational matters in that and directing the manager along those lines. So that's a conversation that I'm sure Councillor Herdisky and I can bring to the board and try and get resolved even sooner. But yes, it was communicated to me that the risk, they do not want to risk the staff having contact with aerosolized hazards due to processing of perhaps mixed recycling and waste.
Okay, thank you.
If there's nothing else, I would move on to 6.1.2, the Lackawanna Regional Water Corporation. I wasn't sure if there's any questions from fellow councilors about the minutes.
I wasn't there last meeting, so.
Well, since then we had, well, that was in the meeting. Anyway, we're just trying to deal with the audit. We received the audit, and there were some issues in terms of replacing the pad at the bulk water and a couple of other maintenance things that we discussed, and basically those will be tendered out to whoever's interested. We're also doing a 10-year capital plan so that when we're looking at resetting the water rates, we can actually take those into account as you know, when you look at replacing capital and what that costs to produce water, and then we can set those rates accordingly. So that's kind of what we're working at now.
All right. If there's no other questions, I'll move. Oh, Councillor, what?
Is there discussion, Joe, in regards to increasing the water rates? Or is it just, or do you have to wait for the 10-year analysis?
Well, basically, once we do that analysis, I guess that there'll be communication with the communities in terms of, but I think that's more specific to the bulk water, because when it comes to community, it's based on cost, and that cost is distributed per capita at this point, until such time, if they do ever put meters in, that may change the discussion, but we're not there yet.
If there's nothing else, I will move on to item 6.2, Policing and Justice Administration Committee. If there's any highlights?
Terms of reference were adopted. It's now named Policing and Justice Administration Committee as opposed to Task Force, just to properly reflect its actual function. Really great conversations happening. As part of the cost redistribution subcommittee, there's continuing discussion about the models. It's being vetted by the main members, which are Suma, Sarm, and so on. And coming back, I believe we are going to be meeting twice a year. Is that right, Councillor Herdisky? Twice a year for the main committee, Policing and Justice Administration Committee. So hopefully in the fall, after the the conventions, that committee will meet again and discuss adopting perhaps a new model, if there is one that's accepted by all the members for the police cost redistribution.
Moving on to item 6.3, CAO and administration reports, sorry. The one question I do have in this report is the service tracker report that we do have. I do see the total time tracked in our report here, but there's no total cost tracked. Now, would a cost be something where it is outside of normal operations, like if it's a normal, you know, if we have to drop off some sand to fix a drainage issue or something like that, is that cost of the sand added to this, or is that just normal operational budgets that we typically have?
Just normal operational budgets.
Okay, so what would show up in our report statistics is only something that might be above and beyond what it would be in our normal operations. Understood. That's all the questions I have in regards to any of the committee reports. If there's any other questions for any of the reports, we can entertain them now. If not, I will entertain a motion to accept the committee reports.
I so move the committee reports as presented.
All right.
Second.
Okay, Councillor Rivers. And all those in favor of accepting the committee reports?
Aye.
Any opposed? Carried. All right. Financial statements and updates. Item 7.1, the budgetary control report. If there's any questions surrounding that, we can entertain those now.
Okay, Mr. Chair, just a very brief comment. The budget's going to hopefully get approved tonight. The budget comparables will be in there hopefully in the next pass.
Okay. I think what I'll do is I'll go through the entire list here and we'll just accept all the financial statements and updates at that point. That's correct? Okay. 7.2, the check registry. If there's any questions in there.
I do have actually, 17,563 in regards to the checks that are being issued to service our generators. In past, just a little bit of corporate history here, it was discussed that once those units come off warranty, they would entertain the thought of putting that out to tender, because there are reputable companies within Saskatchewan here that would like to have the opportunity to load test these generators and also service them. So I don't know if that's been brought to
No,
the administrations.
I appreciate it. So which check are you referring to? Sorry.
Sorry, 17,563. It comes up a couple of times. Which,
That's coming to Canada?
yes,
Yeah, I can dig into that.
which, because to my belief, there's 6 different generators, and I see different checks being cut to these guys. So typically, you send an outfit up from Saskatoon, and a lot of that is mileage. So, yeah, I mean, it's just.
So just to make sure I understand, Councillor, so there's potential companies within Saskatchewan who can do it, or within the garage?
No, within Saskatchewan, within the same driving limits, mileage as.
I'll dig into it.
Okay.
And sorry, one other one, 17,572, the crusher dust that was purchased out of Prince Albert. In that business for a lot of years, and I just question as to why we're bringing crusher dust when it's available in Orange here, but I don't know.
I can dig into that. I did actually make sure we're getting competitive pricing on it, but if there is availability, I'll look into it.
And isn't that what we kind of have in our procurement policy? I know it's kind of getting a little off topic and, going into a higher level discussion just through the checks, but I do recall us having the procurement policy where we did have a local preference as part of the weighing structure, so I would have the same thing, so. Any other checks?
Sorry, there is one other one.
Good.
The 596.
17,596?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
In regards to the transformer refunds, I see refunds for $70, and he must have brought back 2 or 3 transformers, because his was a substantially larger figure than the other ones that were noted in here. But no, just a question.
Check.
344.10.
That was the other number. And there was a number of other ones returned, but to my understanding, a transformer to mitigate the freezing water lines are very similar.
I think there's a special circumstance in that one. I'll get you the details and I can email it to council tomorrow.
Thank you. That's it for this fellow.
So we're not stocking those anymore. If we return one, would that be available to somebody else that wanted it?
Yeah, we're not, from what I understand, though, there's a local outfit now that actually sells them and services now, so we're getting out of the business, so very limited action since I've been here.
I do have a question here.
Mhm.
17647, page 5, La Perron Regional Waste, $51,000. Cost sharing, and I understand that's probably based from a tri-community partnership cost sharing agreement. And I guess if the reps on that board, I guess I should have brought it up before, can take back, you know, the providing a more comprehensive service to the community based on the significant amount we contribute to La Perron Regional Waste in terms of the recycling depot, I would appreciate that.
Noted.
Thank you.
Okay. And moving on to item 7.3, the bank reconciliations, which I believe are quite straightforward on that front. So with that in mind, I would entertain a motion to approve the financial statements and updates from administration.
Also move.
I'll second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Carried. All right, going into the formal motions from the committee of the whole meeting that we had earlier in the month. Item 8.1, the Town of Orange State Address. If someone was willing to make the motion that administration be authorized to move forward the 2021 State of the Town virtual address by Mayor Bertushniak for May of 2021.
Also move.
I'll second that.
All right, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Carried unanimously. Item 8.2, upland shoreline fence. I believe we have,
Yeah, Mr. Chair, if I can just say a couple comments. So since we last chatted with council, so we've done quite a bit of homework on this one, myself. And it's what's come down to through reading materials here and talking to other colleagues is the fence encroachment on the shoreline is and hasn't been compliant with provincial regulations. So we had this discussion, the last one, there's two properties in particular we chatted about last meeting. One of the definite options to resolve it is, and one of the only options to resolve it is to sell the sliver of land that's on municipal reserve property to the property owner and make the property owner whole. The town has the authority to sell it, but the Minister of Government Relations has to approve the sale. So we've looked at all options. I talked to numerous colleagues, planning colleagues of mine throughout Saskatchewan to come up with options. We've grandfathered out. So the ask here tonight is that to get financial assistance to help two property owners remediate the fence to their property lines. Again, we can certainly, if council's interested, pursue the sale option to sell the sliver that's in the reserve. And to your point, Mr. Chair, I've also invited John Gunther from the planning branch out of Saskatoon. That was the gentleman that popped up there on the screen to answer any questions around the Planning Development Act. But again, one of my focuses was the grandfather. Again, can it be grandfathered because it's a long-standing issue? The answer was no. You can't encroach on reserve, municipal reserve land with any form of fencing. It's been that way for a while. And I talked to somebody there last night about 35 years of planning experience, been around longer than I have, and he indicated the same thing. It's been that way for years and years and years. And so I don't know if John's jumping on there or not. There he is. But if he, Mr. Chair, if he has anything to add, you heard what I was saying there, John?
Yeah, so thank you, Steve and Mayor, for being part of this council meeting. I'm not getting video, your video is frozen from my perspective, hopefully it's working from yours. There's a couple of issues here. It sounds like you've got a number of encroachments that are somewhat different from each other, usually they are. Municipal reserve is, as you probably know, under the jurisdiction of the municipality. And if you want to sell, you need to go through a bylaw. That bylaw is then submitted through our office to the minister. And you need to make sure that, of course, it meets the criteria as far as sale is concerned. And I'll probably say this, you probably know this already. Municipal reserve is a public amenity. It's not meant to be blocked or used by any private interest, but you do have the authority to manage that within limits. One of the limits is, and this is outside the kind of the parallel fence I think that you're talking about, any perpendicular fence to the shoreline usually creates some issues as far as access for public use. There's also a challenge there to some degree by floodplain. We usually use the estimated peak water level from the flood, from the lake, I should say, which we know, because water security will know that, to restrict any public use of that space, primarily so that you don't create either interference with the flood channel or impose some kind of private interest in a public area. I'm not sure if that helps, but there's two sections in the Planning Development Act that deal with how municipal reserves used. Section 22 deals with your authority, and then section 192 deals with the kinds of people you can trigger to. It's very limited as far as anything outside the public amenity. We cannot develop policies legally that are outside the Planning Development Act that allow for use of a public space without a bylaw.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you.
Councillor Watt?
Hey, John, thanks for joining us tonight. Question for you. And I can truly understand public access in regards to these said properties. But if that said property is not safe for public to, I'm going to keep it simple, to walk on, because of the geology up here, we're not talking one of the beautiful lakes down south where they've all got these sandy beaches. We're talking a shoreline in such a manner that it's jagged rocks, so on and so forth. So if the public can't physically walk in that area, and some of the unwanted public is entering onto that private property, it is said in legislation that one cannot secure their property. Is that what we're gaining from this conversation?
Well, you know, I have not been up there. I've been to Laurentian and I've been up there in other public meetings, but I don't know the layout there. When I look at this, it walks and talks like environmental reserve because it's protected. It's really protected shoreline. And protected shoreline it's unusual to designate it as municipal reserve. It's usually environmental reserve. Because what you're doing is you're protecting the shoreline for access to the public, but also habitat and riparian area. Now, municipal reserve is somewhat different. It has the same kinds of characteristics in some ways, but you're right. If you don't have an interest in protecting that and keeping public access, so for example, a trail that runs along or near a shoreline is a form of public access. Once you start interfering with that, you break that trail, you kind of trail the ability of public access. I'm sure most of council would realize that when you walk along a trail that's been developed. Many times it's along the shoreline, whether it's a river or a lake. You don't want to interfere with the sense of public access that's there. Not only that, the Crown has an interest in the bed, the bank, and the shoreline. That really is put Crown land. So the municipality should have an interest, a vested interest in protecting that area, both from a flooding perspective, from a riparian perspective, and from an access perspective. Now, that being said, you can, as I said, in the bylaw, in different, because every one of these is somewhat different. Every one of those three that I looked at there, maybe there's more than that, have different characteristics to them. So I think you want to be careful in how you manage that, but you can put a bylaw together that allows for private interests to encroach within the municipal reserve, and just have to be careful about flood potential.
Which is truly understandable, and what I'm going to add, because you brought to our attention that you haven't been up here, obviously you haven't seen the properties. So to manage and mitigate any flood potential and manage that flood protected area, does one turn around and allow access? And these property owners are saying, by all means, come down my driveway, through my property, versus disturbing the shoreline adjacent to the area that they're trying to protect. Secondly, there is no walkway that they're blocking right now. It's again, areas that are, unless you build a path through it, they're unmanageable to walk through because of all the jagged rock. So it's kind of a unique, and each one, as far as I'm concerned anyway, in my opinion, in that each one should be specifically looked at. And they're cut off. You see what happens here, John? Off of this one set piece of property where there's public easement, adjacent to that, and hooked to that, is private property. So a person's gonna walk on that public area, they can't go any further anyway. The shoreline in LaRange is so fragmented that that's why we continually battle with these public reserves, in a sense, and or this crown land. And we're trying to appease everybody within our community. And it makes for a difficult task in the way it's designed right now.
Yeah, through the mayor here, I think the challenge always is protecting the public interest in the long term, not so much the short term.
Mm-hmm.
I realize there's some challenges there. If you can tackle those, but you need to think about, it doesn't have to be a trail. Public access is very different for different people. As you know, if you're walking along the shoreline, sometimes you're willing to take a challenge to walk through riprap or a fragmented shoreline just because you want to enjoy the area. And that's really what the public interest is there to protect. I haven't gone back to the original subdivision to tell you the truth. I know there's a lot of history here. That's one of the challenges. And there seems to be almost a vested interest because the history's been so long. That vested interest sometimes trumps a lot of what council is thinking about. But I'd be careful that you don't make all of that private land. First of all, it's a challenge to put a good bylaw together that makes sense. And I think you'd have to be careful. Anything that's perpendicular to the shoreline is going to interfere with the enjoyment of the shoreline. There's an asset there for the private property, obviously, because they have access to the water directly. So, you have to be careful about how you manage that. And I'm speaking somewhat generically here, so I wish I was kind of able to come up there and see it, but I've looked at the aerials. I've taken a look at the 3 or 4 instances. I think there's 3. One has a road in it on kind of the west side. I think it's west. And there's an older lady that has a property that's parallel. It's got a fence parallel that's been there for some time. And then there's another property to the east, I believe, which is another fence that's vertical, that's perpendicular to the shoreline. And all of those pretend like they have taken on some ownership of public land. And that can be a serious situation, but the seriousness is somewhat dependent upon the situation. And I'm sure you've got, as you mentioned before, Councillor, you've got probably other circumstances around the lake that are very similar.
I didn't notice Councillor. Thank you for that, John. I didn't notice Councillor Hudisky had his hand up, so I'll give him some opportunity to speak here as well.
Yeah, I just expanded a little bit on what Councillor Hugh had to say earlier in regards to the ability to actually have a walking path along the lakeshore. Between the 2 properties that are in question, right next to the one with the fence that's partially on to the lease parcel, the shoreline comes in. There's no lease there. The lease comes in a straight line and it breaks because the private property actually comes right to the shoreline and then it continues on the other side. So there's actually a break in it. The only way that you would actually have a path is if you had a bridge in the water, which you guys might have to approve if we ever did one. And then we could have a walking path maybe 20 feet into the lake and connected with a bridge. The other property in question, it's about as natural state as you can imagine. Like, it's all treed, and you couldn't walk through it because it's in a natural state, other than a little garden patch that was put in there. But it's not, in my view, it's not anything that's harmful to the environment is as natural as it can be. The trees are allowed to grow and be natural in there. So we've got some decisions to make around the table as to how we view this whole thing.
I do have some questions, and maybe you won't be able to answer them. But from my understanding of municipal legislation is anything that the municipality passes, any bylaw that we pass cannot contravene the provincial or federal legislative requirements. If they do, the bylaw will be told, or we would be told by the provincial or the federal government that we have contravened their acts and we are not able to have that bylaw as a legal standing bylaw in our municipality. Are you able to answer that?
Well, that's true, but it's all based primarily on the Planning Development Act. There is other shoreline legislation, water security and environment, both have shoreline legislation. Assuming that you're not going to be imposing private land into Crown land, and I'm assuming that's what the situation is, or that you're going to allow for private construction within the flood channel, which is the estimated peak water level, and I'm not sure eventually where that is. And if that's the case, the bylaw actually has credence. It's very sensitive along shoreline. Let me say that. Most municipal reserve that's actually sold is not affecting the shoreline area. It's actually in interior. It's a separate parcel. It's usually isolated. And council has the option of doing something with that, and usually the sale of that, which is actually it's mandated that sale goes into a cash and loop fund for municipal reserve, which you can then use for other services within the municipality. I know I'm not answering mayor. If that was the mayor asking that question, I'm not answering you directly, but there's some options there, and I think the council considers them carefully. We can work with you. We can work with you on any number of options there, of course, and we're not here to just turn things down and turn them away without negotiating and thinking of what the legislation says. So we're here to help you work through that minefield, especially when it's in shoreline.
And I guess that would kind of feed into the second part of the question that I would have is if we are not able to pass bylaws that contravene provincial and federal legislation, I know that anything that we have, where it be land or land use or development in our community, it would then trigger a municipal services review under the Land Use and Development Act 2007, and that would probably where this would start to trigger some of those points. And the reason I bring that up is within our bylaws we do have item 7.19, which talks about the continued enjoyment of existing leases and policy implementation, where it talks about the existing lessees and permittees may continue to enjoy the same privileges as existed prior to the adoption of the policy. If there was issues of that contravening the act at that point, where is there a missed trigger point here that we did not get feedback from the provincial ministry that this bylaw did in fact contravene if we are allowing fences on municipal reserve? Or is this just something that might not have been caught?
Okay, I have trouble following that.
Oh, can I reframe that?
So, well, let me try to sort through that. I think what you're asking is if you put a bylaw. Well, historically, there's a challenge there because it sounds like you've left. It's not you, but someone in the past has left things in a position where people have done work in the shoreline that has not been enforced. That doesn't make it legal. That doesn't change anything, really. You can still enforce, because really, enforcement is part of a voluntary compliance effort. It's not proactive, it's usually reactive. So you're there to try to administer your bylaws as best you can, and the Planning Development Act, which is the one you're referring to. Now, if you decide that you want to move ahead with a different way of managing the shoreline and being more administratively kind of thorough about how you manage what has happened historically, there's nothing wrong with that. It's just difficult to catch up. I think that's what you're saying. You've got personalities involved, you've got some history there, and each one of those is different from what I understand. I don't know the characteristics, the characters that are involved, and the personalities that are involved, nor does that matter. Because I always say to people, we legislate land, we don't legislate people. And that's really what the municipality does, is you try to manage and balance those. The first place you go for legislation is your official community plan. That's the high-level policy area. If you have legislation and policy area that protects the shoreline, and then you have regulations within your zoning bylaw to ensure that happens, you should be following those as best you can. It's not always easy for a municipality because you're on the front lines, unlike us, where we deal with subdivisions, obviously that's a frontline thing. But you're the ones that are really making those administrative decisions in the public process. So I always encourage people to engage the public, engage the people in the area, think about the broader policy implications. Don't always take these one-off kind of things without thinking about the bigger question, because that always comes into this. So I'm not sure, Mayor, if I'm getting at kind of your question. You can craft a bylaw, you can put a bylaw together for a sale, but I said you're in a very sensitive area with the shoreline.
Okay, thank you. And as we do have a community planner that is also a counselor, I'm sure there's some questions and comments reserved. So I will pass the floor to Councillor Bashara.
Okay. Hi, John. Nice to see you. So I think one thing that we're getting at here, we're missing a piece of history. The Town of LaGrange 2016 OCP does contain a clause that says council shall adopt a shoreline use and development policy. And the previous council went through the process with heavy consultation of developing a policy document for shoreline use and development. That document was vetted through Community Planning Branch. Now it has a clause in it that states, because the council wanted to be sure, because of the community feedback, that the existing privileges that they enjoyed on those leases, which were not well enforced or regulated prior to this, that they would still be able to continue enjoying some of those privileges. Now, those privileges aren't codified in the policy, so it's not specified which particular privileges, but it was meant to be a bit of a catch-all for not having to take drastic action as a result of the policy being adopted. Now, I think what the Deputy Mayor was questioning with that policy 7.1 was, if that is in our policy as the town has adopted, would it potentially trigger the policy becoming null and invalid as a result of contravening the PDA or the development or dedicated lands regs or similar legislation?
That's what I meant.
So if I could just through the mayor here, any policy that's in contravention of the Planning Development Act, or that be a valid policy legally, it depends on what's going on, of course. As I mentioned, restricting access, taking over public land for private benefit, those are no-nos. And I mean, it's easy for me to say that, but that's what the Planning Development Act says. There's certain kinds of amenities that are allowed for, and Abby knows this. Councillor Bashar, I should say, knows this. So you're in a situation where you've got public amenities that can be used for public purpose. Once you start taking that for private purpose, you're using a policy to establish a private entitlement or right, which is changing your language a bit, Councillor Bashar, from privilege to right, because you're really establishing a development right, which is not foreseen or discussed within the Planning Development Act. So to try to manage and balance that, council's in a tough position to think about the public benefit that's there in tension with the private right. Because you have a right as a municipality to protect the public benefit. So I don't know if I'm helping with that, but that's, it's not easy to balance those interests. as everybody knows, people like to encroach on shorelines. That's very common, because it's an asset, it's a
So-
private asset.
If there, just to keep the conversation focused, is there any other questions that we have specifically of John? I know you probably have a busy schedule, before we go into deliberations as to what to do next.
Just one more question. You talk about private benefit. Part of the private benefit that's happening is security to your property from vandalism and those kinds of things. That's why the fences are up, because of historical events that have taken place in both properties and trying to control the flow through the traffic in there because as a result of that. So that's kind of the private benefit that we're looking at.
Well, I mean, we dealt with that in Prince Albert when I was planning director there on a regular basis for walkways. And you're right, there's a lot of emotions and passion around that, especially when crime's involved. But it's up to council to balance those interests, take a look at how you can manage those. It's not easy, for sure it's not easy. But, you know, if you think about the precedent that you could be setting, that would mean that most people could start blocking off areas for private access to a public area. That's a big deal.
I did see that your hand was up. I just wanted to check with Councillor Betry and Councillor Riz to see if there was anything, because I know that we've had a couple of people speak. So maybe what I'll do is I'll Councillor Bashar, and then we'll let John go and then get into the deliberations as quickly next.
Yeah, I just wanted to get it straight from the director's mouth. So restricting access is prohibited on public reserve lands, on dedicated lands, and in our leases and in the shoreline use and development policy, that is explicit. But it does include a clause that landscaping can be used to manage access, not restrict, but manage. So is that a correct or an acceptable policy by using things such as landscaping, shrubbery, and things like that to manage the access to that land? Because the municipality, say if it was for environmental reasons, could plant a bunch of bushes along the shoreline to make sure that the erosion of that shoreline doesn't happen. So is it the same thing? Are we getting at the same thing?
Yeah, I think as long as you don't, Councillor, through the mayor here, Councillor Bashar, as long as you're not straying into the fact that you're creating a fence, just walking like a fence, talking like a fence, and restricting access. If you started tooling the area to restrict access, that'd be a different question. I realize it's a gray zone, but yeah, if you're rebuilding habitat, that's a public community. That's a very thing.
And can the, last question that I have, now that that's been triggered, is that something that the municipality has to be the one to forbear the cost and the initiative to do so? Or if a private owner has the interest of doing that themselves, because they do have access to the shoreline in that area, can they get approval from councils by way of a shoreline policy that makes sense, as you were referring to earlier?
Yeah, as long as it doesn't interfere with the public benefit, sure. Yeah.
Okay. If there's no other questions, I think we can let you go for the evening, John. I think we're good.
Yeah, thank
So
you.
thank you so much for your time, John, and we really appreciate you taking the time out of the schedule and helping us steer some good conversation.
Good to be involved. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks again.
Take care.
Bye.
All right. Well, with that, we will continue on with the issue report. Administration has provided section 8.2, the upland shoreline fence issue. Is there any other discussion, or is anybody prepared to make a motion? I did notice Councillor Riz, and then I'll go to Councillor Betry.
Just a question, with one of these options here, in terms of providing financial support to move the fence back onto the property line, do we know roughly what that means in terms of finances?
I can, Mr. Chair, I can make a suggestion. I thought about this afternoon. I didn't put any kind of upset limit. We can put a boundary on that. If it's up to $5,000, I'm authorized to do it. If it goes over $1,000, I gotta come back to council. We can put a threshold, and then if there's still, we can get an estimate. If it comes in over $5,000, we can come at the council to say then $5,000, we can just go ahead and I can authorize the purchase. That's my fault, I forgot to put a suggested upset limit in there.
Yeah, no, I was just curious. I'm also curious as to why, what would the rationale be for us doing that? And I understand it's prior, long-standing non-compliance issue, but it's pretty black and white to me. So.
Okay, Councillor Vetri?
I hear people's, we're talking about, people intruding on, their yard and that. Where I struggle is we're not asking them to remove the whole fence. We're asking them to move it back onto their property, right? And so this is going to restrict people's access into their backyards because it's going to be on their property. And then they can build it as high as they want, put lights and Gatling guns, whatever they want to do there. And, all we're asking them to do is move it back to their property line.
I didn't know it was Councillor Hudisky.
Well, I guess both of these properties have a long history, probably both over 40 years since they've been the owners of that lease, not the owners, but the ones paying the bill, I guess. And obviously the rules have changed, and that doesn't change anything. When the rules change, I guess we're here to decide what the solution is. And as long as there's some access to it by the public, like in one property where we're thinking about possibly assisting in moving the fence, there's still room to walk through there in terms of public access. The other property not so, but then pretty much ends, that reserve is right at the end, and it's in a very natural state. How do you deal with that and I guess I would be in favor of allowing them to buy within a certain buffer strip along the lake that would still allow for that access for people to walk through, whether they would have to move that fence to the minimum that we set, whether it be like an easement walkway in a residential area might be 3 meters or 20 feet or whatever, 6 meters more likely. That would allow that public access, but it would still maintain the natural state of the one property, and maybe we wouldn't have to deal with that fence if it was outside of that 20 feet.
Yeah, I'd agree with, with something like that, but the ministry would have to approve that, so that would be their next fight. I really appreciate what John said, is the law's been broken here, and we are opening this up to other potential encroachments, which we know has happened in this community. I know I live on Lawton Crescent, and I have access to my backyard, to the walking trails there. How would individuals in this town like it if I said, well, you know what, I'm going to build a fence to keep the people from stealing my cans and bulbs from my yard, and I started erecting a fence all the way into the back without permission?
Well, I guess we are at a crossroads right now, and we've got to make a decision based on where we can move forward. It's something that we can live with, and I think it's maintaining that buffer strip along there wouldn't put us in a position that we would be, but we still would need the approval by the minister to be able to sell that piece of property up to that point. So I think it's worth an effort to see if we get that permission. And if we do, then we won't have to pay money towards assist in moving one fence. They may have to move the other fence back a little bit to be within that 20-foot buffer. And if we get that permission, then we can solve the problem.
I did see Councillor Bashara and then Councillor Watt.
Okay, if you don't mind, I want to try and frame this the way that I look at it. So we have one particular property which has been dealt with, is being dealt with. Then there's these two other properties that we're dealing with on the shoreline. Just as a side note quickly for Councilor Mitchell, the encroaching on the bush behind houses, that is an issue that is ongoing in many places in La Ronge, and people encroach and have built on, so on and so forth. And it's a matter of the municipality taking responsibility for the enforcement of that, and because we haven't, we have to take the liability of not enforcing our own bylaws. So that's why it's on us. For Councilor Ruiz, it's liability on us. So taking responsibility for that sometimes means going, okay, remedy that. But in framing this, we have two separate scenarios, and I believe there's different resolutions for each of them for owner's preference. We have a letter specifically from one landowner requesting the purchase of that land. Now, being familiar with that land, it does, the property owners, the three owners that have had it since it was developed, have all been stewards of the land, and they have maintained that shoreline in quite a natural state. So that doesn't mean that in 40 years, the future owner of that land will be a steward. So Councilor Hrdicky's point of maintaining an environmental buffer strip, so taking the estimated peak water level plus 2 meters, or what have you, to make us feel comfortable or make the minister feel comfortable with that, I think is a really good idea to protect the shoreline and preserve the access, even though the property, as another councillor has mentioned, abuts upon private property. So the R3 parcel, which we're talking about, is behind, you know where that is, goes behind along the shoreline, and then abuts against church property, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
So public access past that point is not there. The public value in that land for recreation purposes as a municipal reserve isn't very high, but there is some environmental reserve concern, as the director was delineating for us. So I don't believe that we have any faults in our policy as it was written. The intent meets the Planning and Development Act, it meets the Dedicated Lands Regulations, and is within our jurisdiction as it is vested in the municipality. So I would propose, I would agree with Councillor Hrdicky that we should attempt a bylaw to sell that parcel of land. Could administration answer if the discussion about potentially purchasing the land the other landowner was had?
Nothing has been happening at this point because I wanted to come to council first before I started speaking out of turn.
Right. So when it comes to that, I really appreciate the conversation being had at this table, because I think it's fair and it does consider each property in its own right.
I did see Councillor Watt and then Councillor Hrdicky.
With all due respect for items that have come up, I've listened to terms of stewards of the land. And I want to, with all due respect to the Crown and the way they've handled our shoreline during our floods of 2011, 2017, 2019, I would have to say they're failing in stewards of the land. Now, with respect to these property owners that have been stewards of the land, that have maintained an adequate erosion control system to prevent that from washing away. When I talked to John earlier in respect to access to that shoreline, a lot of it's not, there is no access for a walking path unless you come to these private properties. In saying that, to me, proper maintenance of a shoreline is to maintain it in its habitable state. So when Mother Nature comes in, she washes that away, it's gone. These landowners, they rebuild that. They put the vegetation back in there. These jagged areas in this Crown area, you can't walk down. So, without belaboring this in any further argument, it only makes sense to give these landowners the opportunity to purchase this so they can maintain it. And if the town, the municipality is in an agreement to maintain this crown line, so be it, because obviously the crown isn't maintaining it in an adequate fashion. So again, I would have to agree with Councilor Bouchard and Councilor Wardisky. Let's allow these individuals to purchase this land and maintain it adequately, especially for the fact that there's private property on one or another side of it.
Just like, Mr. Chair, just one quick point. Well within council's right to sell the property. I just asked that council give direction on the motion tonight. I can certainly go back and work up a bylaw. We can come back with something at the next council meeting if that is council direction tonight. The only thing I suggest is we gotta keep two streams going, because if the minister kills the discussion tonight, as we heard, we still gotta keep the other stream moving down the path. And we're not talking tomorrow morning, we're still giving months notice on this yet, so just wanna make sure council's aware of that.
Yeah, just one more point I thought I could possibly add would be, when the last act came in, was 2007 or 2009?
Also,
So if we were to grandfather it in to 2009, both those properties would be grandfathered in?
no, Councilor McCann, I asked somebody who's been around for 35 years plus, and that regulation's.
What I'm saying is, if you were allowed to be grandfathered in, then nobody else would have that option in terms of.
This discussion wouldn't be happening.
Yeah.
We needed a grandfather.
No, I just throw it out there.
Yeah.
Councilor Bouchard.
Councilor Wardisky, there's an interesting case that kind of set precedent in one of, I think it was a northern community, about shoreline. Squatters' rights don't exist, and it was like proven through the courts. So grandfathered in when it comes to municipal reserve or shoreline parcels that are municipally owned, they have been kiboshed. But my point that I want to make in our discussion, overarching this, it is our responsibility as a council to do a proper review of the shoreline as a whole. We have to look at this as a whole, and while we have piecemeal decisions in front of us, we also have to keep in mind the bigger picture. What are our long-term plans for the shoreline? Are we able to increase the amenities for public access and public use to the shoreline? Because that is our policy through our OCP, and it's a provincial interest with which we are responsible for ensuring when we implement our planning bylaws. So what land is useful to our community recreation uses or protecting environmentally sensitive land, and make sure that we don't lightly sell. The minister doesn't want to see us lightly, willy-nilly selling municipal reserve, because it's dedicated for a reason. But taking into consideration each scenario in the whole picture, in the bigger picture, is important. That when we, if we make a motion to offer the sale, that may be a little too presumptuous of us. And we've had a request for a sale, so that I think we should consider. But offering those that have shoreline leases, the purchase of that land may be a little, maybe taking it a step too far, because those are our dedicated lands. So just a word of caution when we are considering these items.
Councilor Bouchard.
Another concern that I have with these encroachments, it does open up the fact that we are going to be dealing with other encroachments within the community. I know full well that there's been fences built within this community that go onto other people's properties. So that would open it up for that neighbor to call on that neighbor and say, I want that fence removed. We are opening up a huge can of worms if we allow this to go through.
If I may, you know, this is an issue that kind of came up to previous councils, and you know, we spent, I don't know if you remember, Councillor Watt, hours, afternoons, evenings, going through and trying to make sure that we could find ways that the people that have enjoyed these areas could do so, up until the point that you know, the fences that they've currently had we came to the point of disrepair that they came into compliance at their next development permit for fencing. And for me to look at this in many different facets, when we talk about any area, for pure example, at my home location here in the town, right behind me is a beautiful bluff of trees. I'd love to be able to park my boat along the back side of that in the winter and cover it and whatnot, but I can't do it because I don't own that land. The difference that I see is that we've also created a shoreline development policy and a shoreline use for adjacent property owners. I can't go down to the town of Orange and say, I want to buy that chunk of land and put my dock there. I can't do it because I don't own an adjacent property. So it is a benefit of having a property that is adjacent to the shoreline, that you have access to that shoreline for whether it be dock use or being able to enjoy living on the shorelines of the town, which we know are beautiful. When we go into the strategic planning sessions that we've had, and it's coming up later in our agenda as well, we talk about the town's vision being a place where people can go and explore our natural beauty. Part of that is being able to access municipal reserve. So there's many different facets that I see coming into play on one single issue, and that's what makes these decisions extremely hard. For me, when we go into the conversations about covering some monetary costs for residents to be able to do it, this is a stopgap measure to say we understand and recognize that this is a tough issue for you, and we are trying to do our best to find that balance between the public interest and your private interest and benefits as well. Just as the trees along the backside of my property, I have, in some cases, people have hopped my fence and looked in my windows. I have cameras at my house and I've seen it. I have a fence up, but I can't do anything to try outside of what I can legally do within my property bounds to make sure nobody is able to access that. And I would suspect that every other person within the municipality has the duty to do that on their own accord as well. And I can't do anything in public land, just as anybody else anywhere else can do things in the public land to preserve their property. And for me, I can't make a motion in my current role as the chair. I would urge councillors to go the line of trying to find that balance between the public interests, weighing the public interests and the private interests that we have in these specific cases, and use this as an opportunity to see for all of the areas that we have on the shoreline developments across our shoreline in the town of Orange, the same opportunity, and that is to come back into compliance and recapture that downtown core. And I think if you remember, Councillor Watt, that was our intention when drafting this policy, is that over the course of time, we would recapture the municipal reserve for public access.
On that note, a couple items. If development was to change on those private properties, at that point, the town would step in and say, no, that's not happening. I would like to bring to the attention on the decision-making process here, and I think it's something that administration can probably do, is let's have a look at our shoreline. That's it's already been compromised, the access to public reserve. And I say that no matter, and again, this might be a directive for administration, is have a look at the shoreline. Private, public, 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 private, 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 public, you know what I'm saying? So, okay, it's gonna confuse an individual. I'm out there hiking, I'm the naturalist, and I'm going hiking along the shoreline, and well, all of a sudden, I can't go onto that property, it's private. I'm a little confused, so I turn around and I go back. I'm gonna go down that part of the shoreline for 300, 250 meters. It's private. It's already been compromised, people. So here we are debating this, as we did a while ago, and attempting, what can we do? As far as what I'm concerned about is, it's been brought to the attention of the bylaw officer, what, somebody's upset because they can't walk on that piece of property because there's a fence up there, knowing full well that they're gonna have to turn around in 25 meters because they're now on private property. This is, it's, again, with all due respect to previous council, we went through this. If there's any future development on that private property, leave what's there alone, and if there's any future development, no, you're not doing it. That's my case as far as.
Do those Councilor Bashar and then Councilor Diskey.
For information purposes, I know that Deputy Mayor and Councillor Watt have seen this, but there exists a map that was produced showing the different status of the property, public or private, like where the actual leases are and where the private property goes straight to the shoreline in the municipal files. So if you aren't feeling confident about decision making, that is something we could always table this so that you can have more of the information put in front of you, that we can have that bigger picture look. I'm just putting it out there for information purposes that that information does exist.
Councilor Diskey then.
Yeah.
You know, just for the sake of it, Councilor Diskey, I have noticed that Councilor Riz hasn't had the opportunity to speak frequently on this. I'd like to give her the opportunity to speak first, and then everybody else.
Yeah, that's fine.
No, I was just listening to everyone, what your thoughts were. I truly believe that we should not be restricting access to something that is public. And I did want to put a resolution on the floor. So, but I think that Joe can have his piece. So I'll let you go and then I'll move forward with the resolution that I have.
You know, I think if we identify part of the shore that has restrictions with the private, private sections being non-continuous, like it breaks it. So if we had a policy where that we identify the area where if there was somebody that wanted to buy pieces of it, we wouldn't restrict anybody, but we have to maintain that 20 foot or 6 meter along the shoreline. And so we're not restricting anybody. If other property wanted to buy up to whatever, we could take that money and we could put it into developing some other recreational areas for the town in lieu of that. Because in terms of adding value to the public, it's not there. So why not get the value out of it, still have access, and put that money into somewhere where the public can enjoy a little more.
But then we'd be banking on the ministry of approving it.
We do have, we as a municipality, that is our land. It was given to us by the province. The province just merely imposed regulations on it, like the Planning and Development Act. While it is in the minister's yes or no abilities, if we have a good case as to what we want to do with the land in our community, we can put that rationale forward. It's not the minister doesn't like this, so he's gonna say no. It's the municipalities put forward reasonable arguments as to why this land could be sold and that we're gonna get market value, and that market value cash that we get for that land gets reinvested and only can be reinvested in either new dedicated lands or capital amenities on dedicated lands. So those are the restrictions that we have if we take money for this.
And just on that point of information, we do, my experience with government, especially in matters that revolve around what municipalities have a lion's share of the jurisdictional boundaries on, they do allow for a lot of municipal autonomy. So I don't foresee a huge issue with that, but that's, once again, we're playing with ifs, ands, or buts. But I will move to...
Yeah, no, again, I don't believe that the shoreline should be restricted, and I would like to request that administration be authorized to offer financial assistance to rectify 2 of the 3 fence lines to their respective property lines, capped at $1,000 per property as a subsidy and an in-kind gesture, and otherwise it needs to come back to the council table.
Okay, so I have the motion to follow the request for council direction here in the issue report. I see that was moved by Councillor Riz. Is there a seconder to that motion?
I'll second it.
Second. Yes, Councillor Betry. Before the question is called, I would like to request that this motion be recorded.
Sorry, point of order?
Yeah.
Can that motion be split to each property? Or to each individual property, to have a motion on each individual property?
I think you just word the word motion
Leave
as
the
per
motion as it
property,
is.
say per property.
The motion as it stands right now, there is a motion to split, there's no motion to amend, if you would like to do either one of those.
Be a separate motion.
That is a separate motion, but there is no motion to split right now.
Sorry.
So the motion on the floor in its current wording is that the motion is that the town of Orange directs administration, or that administration be authorized to offer financial assistance to rectify 2 of the 3 fence lines to their respective property lines, not to exceed
$1,000 subsidy as an in-kind gesture.
$1,000 subsidy as an in-kind gesture. That is the current motion. If there was a seconder, so we did have a seconder to the motion, Councillor Betry, the motion has been requested for a recorded vote. Is there any discussion? I know that you brought up discussion around a potential amendment.
Yes.
One question.
Because it's already been said, or they can serve papers to remove the fence, so that's gonna be
Just one
upheld.
question.
There has been a call for the question from the floor procedurally.